This is DUNE TALK, a DUNENewsNet.com production. Join us now for the latest Dune news, reactions, and lively discussions.
Hey everyone, Dune Part 2 has hit theaters over 2 weeks ago, and many millions of people have seen the movie, some multiple times, including our crew, of course. This episode, we're looking into reactions from the community. Yes, we'll be diving into some of the many comments and insights that you all have shared. This is Marcus, editor of DuneNewsNet.com, and I'm joined again by this awesome group of Dune and movie fans.
Hey everybody, it's Garin. Glad to be back. Saw Dune for the third time last night with my team at work. So it's fresh in my mind. I'm ready to go through a lot of these great comments that we got.
That's exciting, Garin. Definitely excited to have a more in-depth discussion and get into some of the comments. Johnny Sobchak here again, and thanks for joining us.
Mark from Dune Info here. I know we're not keeping score, and it's not a competition, but round 6 to me last night. It was in Dolby Atmos, so that was very good. And as Johnny said, excited to sort of look at the feedback from the community.
Hey everyone, I'm Rachel. I've also seen it a few times now, including in 4D, the RDX format. I don't know how much I gained from that experience, but I am excited to keep talking about Dune.
Great, let's dive into some highlights from Dune Part 2.
Dune Movie News.
So hopefully everyone listening or watching today has seen Dune Part 2, but just a quick reminder that we are not avoiding spoilers. On this show and others moving forward, you can expect us to talk freely about all the events of both movies, as well as Frank Herbert's original Dune novel. And we'll give spoiler warnings if we go beyond the story of those. Johnny, before we kick off with reactions today, obviously Dune has been hitting the theaters all over the world. It's opened in China 1 week ago, opened in Japan this past weekend, and it's been doing well overall. What are your thoughts on where we are?
I knew that it was going to be a success, of course. I think a lot of people felt that way. Even though the first film, when it came out and how it came out and everything was hindered in a number of ways, I was optimistic, and it seems like it's kind of meeting those expectations, which is great. Not only as a fan, obviously, but of course, you would hope that when all this effort and time and dedication is put into a movie this big, that it gets some sort of reward. And it seems like audiences obviously are really connecting with it. This movie is already going to be crossing $200 million domestically this weekend, which is twice as much as the first film made. And there's actually an opportunity that it could pass 300 million or get close to 300 million by the time the run is done. So tripling the result of the first, especially for a Hollywood studio, like that is what they really are looking for, is to have a reaction at home. And I think that's really important, but abroad as well, in Europe, and Europe is kind of where it's been performing the best, but even in China, it's actually going to become the first Hollywood sequel to come out in the COVID era or post-COVID era, where it's going to actually perform better than its predecessor. 300 million domestically, and probably worldwide, it's going to be like 750 to 800 million or so, which is pretty much right where I put it, prior to release. And I think that's certainly a good result. I think they would have been happy with like 600 million probably worldwide. It's coming out in March, and it's performing like a July tentpole release, like an Oppenheimer or a Barbie or something like that. So that again is very impressive. And historically in March has had some big releases, especially in the last 5 or 10 years. But this movie is performing better than virtually all of those.
So if part 1 got 400 million and part 2 gets 800, so that means that Sai is going to get 1.2 billion.
I wouldn't count on that, Mark. But I think it definitely bodes well. I mean, frankly, I was just thinking about this the other day. I think Dune Part 2 and Oppenheimer, they're very different movies, but I think there's actually a lot of like comparisons or parallels you can draw between the two. And obviously Oppenheimer's a lot of people like talking in rooms and like kind of like conspiracy type stuff and political machinations and all of that. And that movie almost made $1 billion. So I feel like audiences are like a little bit more primed for like a slower type of movie, or like a movie that's not just action. So I was actually just thinking the other day, like, as much as people have loved Part 2 and have like really responded to it and want more Dune, I feel like Messiah actually has like, obviously it's going to be a very different type of movie, but I'm actually pretty optimistic about how it might even perform once it comes out, whenever that is.
Hey, Johnny, this is just one data point, but I went and saw, like I mentioned earlier, Part 2 last night with my team at the same IMAX theater that I went with my wife on opening night 2 weeks ago. And it was just as full, and everybody clapped at the end of it. And I thought to myself, Are these repeat viewers or are these new viewers? Of course I can't tell. I don't know these people, but like really interesting,
An
that
exit poll,
weeks
stand
later,
outside.
it's the same
Yeah.
pack,
Yeah, that's a really good point, Gary. I'm glad you brought that up, and I'm also glad to hear that it's getting that kind of reaction. But yeah, I mean, IMAX it's been performing like exceedingly well. Yeah, there's a lot of factors, and Garen, I think you're definitely onto something in terms of whether it's IMAX or Dolby or 4DX, rumbling your seat or whatever the case.
Don't
may be.
bother, folks.
Giving,
It's so
giving you motion sickness.
It was
yeah,
ridiculous.
I think there's actually a video I saw that went kind of viral in the last like week or two where it was someone during, I think maybe like the Worms ride or something. And they were recording in the theater, obviously, and the seats were like going up and down and like they're like, this
Yeah.
is like
I
like
hurt
absurd.
myself. I was very unprepared. And I think the thing about 4DX is it was fun. It's not a format for like a serious film.
Yeah.
So,
right.
and I just kept thinking to myself, this is not how Denis wants to be experiencing
Yeah.
this movie with like, water squirting in my face and, being shaken so hard I can't actually see what's happening on the screen. But I felt the same way when I watched Dune on like the plane.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, exactly.
But just going back to your point about IMAX, just the press release from IMAX for the first 12 days. In domestic weekend, 24% of North American total was IMAX, and international 21% of the takings were IMAX screens. And in China, for the weekend, it captured 33% of the total. So a lot of people are going to see Dune Part 2 in IMAX.
Both the audience and critic scores for this movie are overwhelmingly positive. There aren't really that many movies, at least recently, that go above 90% on both sides on Rotten Tomatoes, as I was mentioning. So I wanted to kick off community reactions, just reading a few of the positive ones that we've seen on the channel. So starting with 110, Denis is a master filmmaker and made some smart strategic choices when it comes to adapting the book to the big screen. As a lifelong fan of the novels, I was floored by this majestic film. And then we have Brother Johnny XXXX. Villeneuve's Dune is a major achievement in filmmaking. They managed to capture the main themes and essence of the story, while still making it accessible, entertaining for those who have not read the book. I'm not concerned about potential changes to Messiah because I have faith in Villeneuve will handle them with great care. And Dordogne, this movie could not be more true to what Frank Herbert wrote because the ideas are fully expressed. So we've seen a lot of those types of reactions on the channel in the past few videos as well. And of course, there are always people who are less enthusiastic about the movie, so they maybe enjoyed it, but it didn't blow them away. So I had saw one from Not From Here 8889. It was enjoyable, but I'm in the minority who weren't blown away. It felt like a well-made blockbuster using Dune as a template. It didn't stick to landing with the message. The theater was cheering at the end. And then you had some people who were outright negative or disappointed. So for example, Wingdo Thomas, the movie basically lacks everything that was interesting about the books. Okay, I'll give it maybe 50%. It's surface level, characters are one-dimensional and less smart in general, and the whole thing is dumb. Ironically, it gets closer to Star Wars. If you think about it, the new Dune movies would fit perfectly as prequels to Star Wars. Something you never say about the books. And then we had one comment from Larry3498. Did anyone involved in this review receive compensation for all the puppery and gushing? And I can confirm that.
I wish.
I wish.
Unfortunately.
Good idea, actually.
So yeah, that's around us. So as mentioned, overwhelmingly positive, but we've had reactions from all over the spectrum, and I think that's great. It's really amazing to see all the different perspectives that this movie is bringing forward, and it just means that there's a lot of exciting discussions to come in the movie ahead. And I just want to be clear, whether you love this movie, and you're saying it's your favorite movie, you don't have to be shy about that. And if it was disappointing for you, that's perfectly fine. There are a lot of people who feel the same way about certain aspects of the movie or the movie overall. And I think that's what's great about the community, that we can put together these different perspectives and have discussions. And at the end of the day, Dune is such a deep story that there's, we'll be talking about this movie for years to come. One of the topics that I had been vocal about on the show in the past is the idea of Dune as a TV series. So I know that Mark, there are a couple of comments that caught your eye on that topic.
Yeah, sure. So as I say, we've often talked, Dune, even with 2 parts, is not enough to tell a 600-page book, and we've always wondered what it would look like as a TV series. So we got some comments from Palaquin David, who said, I really don't think that a serialized version would work. There are too many cooks in the kitchen, none of whom would have the skill and commitment to the source material of a Villeneuve. When I think of what has been done in the case of Asimov's Foundation, or worse, Tolkien's Second Age in The Rings of Power, I can't help think the big screen is where the story of Dune belongs. And then we've also got Tyler Jensen 8383 that says, I hear what you guys are saying regarding a prestige series, but there's just no way it would be executed to this level in that format. The budget and subsequent talent in front and behind the camera they can bring to the table because it's a blockbuster film release is just far and away above what they could swing in a 10 episode series. Honestly, not even close. So that's an opinion. Those are opinions that I've not thought about before, about whether or not we get in a singular vision from Villeneuve, someone who loves the series. I'm not saying he's an auteur in that sense, but we're getting a really strong vision from a single source that allows him to tell the story that he wants to tell, as opposed to a miniseries where every couple of episodes you're getting another director, there's multiple people in the writer's room. The showrunner is effectively the single source of truth, the single vision in that. And yeah, even the budgets needed for a 20-hour miniseries would probably be beyond what you get for most TV shows. Now, I'm probably in the minority. I've never seen a single episode of Game of Thrones, so I can't sort of say what that's like. But that's an interesting viewpoint, and I'm not really sure where I sit on that. I mean, I absolutely love the movie, and I think it works great as a movie. I still want 20-hour miniseries that covers subplots to do with coffee services or
Yeah,
here and
people
just
talking in
facing off.
rooms.
Yeah, that's what I want to see as well. So, what do you guys think? Have you got any thoughts on that?
Well, I came from the Game of Thrones podcasting universe, so that's how I got into everything. So I have seen every episode a million times. I think that one Foundation slander. I like that show. Rings of Power, yeah, great, isn't great. I'll agree, but I like Foundation, and I think that there's a place for small screen adaptations of stories that are enhancements, maybe of like a larger story that maybe we already understand. Like these films have done a lot of legwork for the potential audience that would be tuning into that. So that could save some money. But I'm also a fan of people sitting in rooms talking as major plot points. And I think that the worst episodes of Game of Thrones are the ones that are too much not talking and too much like battle and action sequences. So it works for me. You do worry, when anything you love is adapted. Who knows? But so far, so good.
I know even the first miniseries only had about 4.5 hours, 6 hours if you include commercials. 4.5 hours is less time than Villeneuve had for his 2 films. And, we got a lot more stuff in the miniseries, but it's not as cinematic. And part of that's to do with the budget or the costumes,
Right.
or just trying to fit everything into those 4.5 hours. But a Game of Thrones budget and a Game of Thrones runtime, I think would be an interesting TV series. Yes, it might not have that zeitgeist of everyone wanting to go see it in IMAX, the worm riding scenes, and the impact it has. I want both.
Yeah, we
Do I
can
have
have
to
both.
choose? Do I have to choose? I want both of them. I'm sorry.
I'd like to just make a comment. I really appreciated both David and Tyler's comments. I think those are really astute observations, and I really can lean in both directions on what do we give up when we move from something as rich and overwhelming as we experience with these Dune movies to something that's a miniseries. I know this is not a direct comparison, but I wanted to just make a comment about when Saving Private Ryan came out, and how that movie was really a powerful experience of understanding, what those men and women went through during that particular part of World War II. And then when Band of Brothers came out, and I'm a real fan of Band of Brothers, and yeah, it's not quite as fulfilled of a vision, maybe in terms of the special effects, and maybe in terms of some of the aspects of the acting that were very high, and the directing for Saving Private Ryan. But Band of Brothers is something that I often go back and watch over and over. So I'd like to believe that that's something that can be done here with Dune, where I think you mentioned, Rachel, we have a vision set by Villeneuve, and now these showrunners and subsequent episode directors can then follow suit from that we saw with Band of Brothers, and even this latest one, Masters of the Air, which, by the way, I am really enjoying.
That
And
show is great.
yeah, it's very well done. In fact, so far I even like it almost as well as Band of Brothers. So Mark, I'm with you. I want to see both.
I don't know. I guess we're hearing both sides of it. I'll come down on one side since I'm the movie person here, I guess. And I'm maybe a little less ardent in my defense of the book, or like my love for the book. I, if I had to choose, I'm going with a film trilogy or series, like every time. For me, like, I retain the images and the ideas more than anything, in terms of just the sandworms, and Arrakis is such an all-encompassing like environment, like a character, like upon itself, and Caladan and Getty Prime, like all these interesting locations. And for me, like, to see that realized in to the fullest extent, or at least close to that, in live action, like, I want to see that in IMAX. I want to see that in the biggest, grandest way possible. I want to get the full sense of scale and scope. We don't really get that level of filmmaking very often nowadays. And so, whereas on the small screen, I feel like they really are. I mean, we're talking about the Rings of Power, which is the scale and scope in that series is, whatever you think of the quality of the series, like, they certainly go for that, that element of it. Same thing can be said for Game of Thrones or House of the Dragon, which I think are better in general. Foundation also has a very epic, quote unquote, sensibility to it. It's a lot more nerve wracking for me, I think. And I'd rather just see it one movie here, another movie, and then a third, hopefully. And that's kind of my personal preference, I guess. But I think also as a series, again, as someone who is maybe not as much of a lover of the book, like, I think there are certain things in the book that I genuinely, like, just don't have interest in, like, seeing.
And Arrakis is the biggest, right? That's the jewel of all of those, like, visual somatic largeness that we get to see. And I think, like, maybe the series maybe wouldn't focus so much on gigantic planet-wide battles. It would be more smaller sets and more intimate conversations, which, for me, is missing from Denis' version of Dune. I understand why he didn't do it, but it's like different flavor profiles of, like, similar cuisine, right? We get just something for everyone. It could work. It could go wildly bad. We don't know. We have examples of things working and things not working in very similar situations. So I'm not going to make any judgments until I see something. I certainly wouldn't say no.
Just because it's originally filmed for the small screen doesn't mean you can't have the big screen experience. Like, take an example of Rings of Power, whatever you felt about the story, but the first 2 episodes were aired in theaters. So, like, a special event. So that's always a
True.
possibility there. And I will say, of course, we have the example of Game of Thrones, of course, huge budgets. That was a series that was coming out week after week. And, I remember hearing The Office, like, people would be always talking about it. It just felt like it was as big as the movies, to be honest. Another recent example, and there's just a couple episodes out there. There's the series Shogun, which is airing now on Hulu, and that's a period piece. And to be honest, like, I would say that sometimes Dune feels more like a period piece, like that feudal society, rather than like an outright science fiction. And obviously a show like that doesn't have the budget anywhere near a movie, but it's still a very immersive experience. And I can imagine that those come from books as well. If they try to make movies out of that, I'm sure, like, the quality wouldn't be as good in terms of the story. So they're just like a lot of, I've mentioned a lot of different things that you can do on TV series, like how those conversations, all those political machinations, like you could have the duck and drop, that scene I was
Yeah,
mentioning.
you have the time
Have,
for it,
so
for
yeah,
sure.
I would be from in a camp. Like I would really, really love to see Dune, the original novel, Dune Messiah, Children of Dune, as like seasons of TV series. That would
Mhm.
be my dream. So going on to another interesting topic. So there was a lot of discussion we've seen in the community about the North-South Fremen divide, and also the Bene Gesserit's role in religion and influencing the beliefs of the Fremen through the missionary perspectiva. So I know that Rachel, we had brought up a few comments that sort of kick off that discussion.
Yeah, when I'm watching an adaptation of anything, there obviously I want what I want, and then I'll get mad if I don't get what I want. But I'm also like looking at like the people I'm going to the film with and saying like, what did you get out of this? Like, how did did what the director intend actually make it through to you? I mean, we heard that some people were having people clap in the theater at the end instead of kind of feeling that ominous feeling that I felt in all of my viewings. So when I talked to my friends and family about what they got out of it, I was hearing a lot of confusion really about the prophecies in general and why there were secular Fremen and why and Southern fundamentalist Fremen, because they say fundamentalist Fremen so many times, like it must be a thing. And I have to be like, no, it's not a thing. So we pulled some comments that people made about that. So there's one from Max 647 that says, I don't buy that there are secular Fremen, that some don't believe in him or worse, think of him as a false prophet in the beginning would fit. Maybe it was the way they handled it, but it came across very clunky. And then we have another comment from Glad Mods, who says this panel would have benefited from more diversity of opinion, too much glossing over the many deviations of the story, too much villain who can do no wrong. For example, they go on to talk about how Chani was turned into a warrior, atheist, girl boss instead of a Sayadina. It's a long comment, so I'm summarizing. But I did want to pull those because when I was speaking to my friends and family, they kind of just didn't get that the prophecy in general was just kind of like this very vague template that had been sort of laid on Arrakis for a Bene Gesserit in need of some quick power or influence to take advantage of. That part was very lost on them. And so we were talking about what does the North and South Fremen do to the viewer? Like what purpose does it serve? And at least from our American point of view, they were just kind of taking it from like our political situation where they thought, oh, well, the secular Fremen are more liberal, more educated, and the Southern Fremen are not, or, more religious or more, whatever prejudices anyone had at the time. And I think that's also feeding a lot of the negative reactions about Stilgar. I was like, no, this is supposed to show you that these religions that are seeded, that were laid on these people that they didn't even come up with, are levers to manipulate them to do exactly what you want so that you can get the power you need in any situation. And that part was kind of lost on them. So I don't know if that was actually a successful uh, strategy for the film. I mean, I think it certainly got us to see the long arm of the religion, right? But I don't know if it gave us insight into what the book had to say about religious figures and that charismatic leader part in general. So good comments that, maybe I don't agree with everything they say, but I definitely see their point considering my friends' reactions to the films.
I mean, in science fiction, there was often the trope of making something really simple to get the point across. So, you've got a desert planet, you've got an ice planet, you've got warrior planet. It's very segmented. And so we know in Dune Messiah that there are Fremen who are against Paul. So, they don't believe in him. They think he's led them astray. So I think dividing the Fremen into believers and non-believers, if you like, makes sense particularly if you're setting up Messiah. And it's a sci-fi trope to just divide them in half and say one's in the north, one's in the south. And I think that makes sense from the science fiction point of view. And there's a line from Irulan in one of the diary entries that says, the South is so hostile, nothing lives there without faith. So it's clearly setting up that the southern half of Arrakis is more faith orientated.
I was just going to say that I think like in terms of like making a story showing people maybe who are not familiar with Dune, who've never read Dune, you need a way to show them that these people are not just victims, right? So splitting them into these two viewpoints, one gives you lots of exposition, like opportunity that you can talk about how the Fremen work. But also you're able to see that they're not all just blindly following someone off a cliff, that there are some that were skeptical. Because if they hadn't been, there would be some comment that it's not realistic that all the Fremen were just suddenly united underneath this random white savior, right? So I think it was kind of smart on the writing portion to get that kind of theme at the audience really clearly. And it is also, as you said, a trope that people are familiar with in science fiction. So, I'm just disappointed that maybe the overall idea that religion is used to control people, even though we have Chani standing up, yelling it at people, seems to have been forgotten, I think, by the end of the film.
The Bene Gesserit has laid on their extra bits on top of an existing religion, an existing belief.
Right.
Every planet, it seems, would have a religion built into it at some point. And we know that the Fremen have been a repressed tribe moving from planet to planet. So, they have this religion, and the Bene Gesserit has just gone, right, those are the levers, as you say. We can insert that in times of need. We'll just say that it'll be a Reverend Mother who brings your Maddie, who brings
right, because then you have a Reverend Mother who's able to say, even in part one, when Jessica's talking to the Shadout Mapes, and she's sort of stumbling through that conversation, and she stumbles upon like a good keyword that, those are those levers. And again, Arrakis is supposed to be, because it's so difficult there, and it's got its own extra layer, extra, juicy prophecy that they've seeded. That wouldn't have been necessary on a different kind of softer, planet that's more connected and less fundamental survival. So, the Bene Gesserit, I think, keep getting forgotten, that they're not necessarily on a side. They just want power. So they're going to do whatever they can do in any situation to be on top. How Denis used a North and South kind of fundamental versus secular split to get that point across. I think it worked, but I think it works more the more times you see the film.
Rachel, you just said, I think the more times you see it, the more obvious that part of it becomes, or at least a little bit more clear. Maybe I definitely agree with that. I realized that I was having a conversation with a couple of friends and family, and I think I was like, well, remember in part one? And they're like, oh yeah, like I remember. And so I think even the elements, especially earlier in part one, when the Reverend Mother and the Bene Gesserit come to Caladan, that whole discussion they have there, like that does really lay it out like entirely, but it's so early on, and it's just, and everything else from then is kind of like breadcrumbs that it's hard, I think, to recall that. I think people, as they go back and rewatch part one, in the weeks and years, months to come, I think they'll appreciate the connections more and make those connections a little bit more easily, perhaps. And then the other thing I think is with the North-South division, yes, it's a little simplistic. Yes, it's a little, binary perhaps. But I think the thing for me that I also liked about it was it added like an extra layer sense of geography to Arrakis as well. Like noting that it's not like all the same, that it is this huge, like expansive, like space. It's not just, the walls outside, Arakeen, and they're just kind of going back and forth. And I like that they discuss like the storms, like around the belt, and even the look of the South when they actually go there is very different from how it looks where they spend most of the film up north. So I just like that was, it works obviously as this whole like religious aspect of it, which is very important. But I think even as like a world building element, I think I liked how they split that up a little bit and gave it a little extra texture.
I also think making that writing decision to separate the North and the South and provide this spectrum of believers, what it allowed me to do as an audience member is to decide which perspective I was going to look through as I'm observing Paul. So as Paul was evolving as this first just this person invited into the Fremen society, and then as he begins to become a Fedaykin, and then he's revered, and that those two perspectives kind of allowed me the opportunity to decide, well, where do I stand? Where do I fall in this? Is he really? No, he's not. He's even saying he's not the Messiah. But then these things keep happening, and I kind of wonder. And then throughout the movie, whoa, he has some power here. So I really liked how they did that, even though in the first viewing I was a little thrown by it because I was trying to figure out, wait, why are we doing this? But now I actually, just in the third time I watched it yesterday, I really liked that dynamic. And I thought it added a lot of drama and depth, not only to the Fremen, but also to how I'm observing Paul.
And I would say that there is some valid criticism of this division in the sense that when you're reading the book, it's clear that that for generations and centuries that the Fremen had been working together, unified of this dream of making a paradise on Arrakis, and they practically they've had to gather these huge quantities of water and set them aside so that they'll be able to terraform the planet, basically in effect. And to do that, you need to be unified, right? And then the idea that that they're not unified, that there are these two different camps, that's sort of, I can understand why that causes a conflict there. I guess it would,
Mhm.
it does make sense that some of them believe that the prophet is going to come from the Fremen versus the prophet come from outer world, but it's sort of, there's something to be said about the concern that some Fremen, they just don't believe. Is that just tie in too much to our modern society, rather than like a realistic situation, like how this group of people who are surviving on one of the most inhospitable planets in the world, how they would get together.
Yeah, it also doesn't kind of make sense. Like, why is Stilgar a leader of a northern siege, right? I mean, we know in the books that there's really the north is just where they do all of their criminal activities. Where they mine their spice and they do all that. But yeah, I think you're right. Like, there are parts of it where you start to think, you're like, wait, why is it like that? Is it just because Stilgar killed the right guy and now he's the leader? Yeah, I like in the book though, like there's like basically like two sieges, right? There's always a northern bird. There's like the northern outpost of every siege. So when they go south, they're not necessarily going to another siege. They're just going to their southern siege, the southern, like it's like their summer house. So
I
they live
would
a
just say
little
as
bit
well,
softer life.
we've kind of eliminated the Liet Kynes
Yeah.
subject. So that was the thing that was unifying the Fremen, is their dream of a green Arrakis. And Stilgar says in the film, when the Lisan Gaib comes, he will bring us to a green paradise. So they've combined those two aspects. So I think that's part of where the conflict comes from the readers of the novel, is we've got a unified Fremen for a green Arrakis, but we don't have a unified Fremen believing in the Lisan Gaib coming from the outer world. And the film pushes those together, and there's some friction there, I think.
Liet isn't Liet, the Liet that we know. I'm still very confused about that.
To be honest, that's one sort of thread that it completely dropped. Like she's
Yeah.
such an important figure in Dune Part 1. Like when Paul asks her, "Who are you?" to the Fremen, and that smile, and all of them really respecting him. And in Dune Part 2, she wasn't mentioned at all. There was no mention, like let alone any connection to Chani, which we don't know if that even exists. It seems like that's been dropped completely. But yeah,
Yeah.
that was curious. Yes. So then another interesting topic that came up was, what was actually the plan of the Bene Gesserit, specifically Reverend Mother Mohaim, in terms of Paul? I know that Garin, you picked out an interesting comment on that.
Yeah, this comment from Zorak 964. By the way, I love that name, Zorak. In the first movie, there's a scene where Gayasil and Mohaim asks the Baron to allow Jessica and Paul to survive the attack, saying, "Allow them the dignity of exile." However, in the second movie, Mohaim tells Irulan that the Bene Gesserit wanted to eliminate the Atreides for becoming insolent. And Irulan replies saying the plan failed because Paul Atreides was actually alive. So this person says it seems contradictory because Mohaim intervened for Paul's life in the first film. After all, did Mohaim want Paul dead or not? Did I miss anything? I think that's a really astute observation again. I actually did not really clue into that. In fact, even I thought last night after I watched it, did I catch on to that? It does appear to be, at least on the surface, a contradiction. So I guess I'd like to kind of open that up to some of the team's thoughts on that one.
Yeah, it's something I'd noticed on like Feyd-Rautha or something like that, I think, yes. And it's been discussed on Reddit as well a few times. And I think it's a kind of they've shifted direction, so it kind of contradicts. But with the Bene Gesserit, you can always do some hand waving and say it's plans within plans. And is the Reverend Mother lying to the Emperor? Was she lying to the Baron? Is she lying to Irulan?
I think that yes, you can hand wave and kind of say plans within plans, because that's kind of what Frank did. So like, I think that yeah, there are probably literal like textual inconsistencies within the movie. Um, I think that you could argue that for sure, but I think yeah, it's too hard to like know like to know the mind of Mohiam or the Bene Gesserit or like what's going on with that.
Do we think that the Reverend Mother is also lying that she told the Emperor to eliminate House Atreides? Is she just upping herself up on that?
In my
She-
mind,
She
yes.
could be, yeah,
In my
definitely,
mind, yes. Yeah.
definitely. I think that's an interesting point, Mark, because I'm with Rachel. I think he was going to do that no matter what. I mean, I think he's clearly, especially the way he's depicted in the film, like he is a very like he's like totally like trying to do the most desperate things to like retain control and to like extend his life or his reign. And I think that yeah, I don't think that necessarily Mohiam would have been like, oh, you've got to do this. You'd be like, I really want to do this. You'd be like, oh yeah, we can like twist this to work for us or something like that.
Because that plan would have been in motion before she tested Paul. So,
Yeah.
is she just trying to see if Paul's worth saving because she's put this plan in motion? But she
Right.
should check that first. It's hard to know.
Yeah.
So
But of course, the Bene Gesserit plan, it could have been like in place since Jessica had a son instead of a daughter. So maybe even then, Mohiam was saying, okay, like how are we gonna deal with this? But I think that that's right. We don't get enough of exploration of the Emperor's motivation, so it is possible to look at it from different angles.
mhm.
But yeah, I will say that even though for Irulan in the film, because in the book it's explicitly stated that she's not like a top Bene Gesserit. She took the training, like she went to the school, but she wasn't considered one of like the top students. But then Mohiam in this film, she really says like astute for one of my top students or something along that lines. But even her being like a powerful part of the Bene Gesserit order, it's clear that Irulan is in the dark. So Mohiam really isn't telling her a lot about the plan, and she's not saying any of her suspicions that Paul could still be alive. It's basically Irulan who comes to her own conclusions. Oh, Paul could still be alive. What if he's still alive? So it does seem that there is a big divide between the leadership of the Bene Gesserit and then the sisters beneath them.
Movie version of Ireland is more of a Bene Gesserit than she is in the books. It sort of makes sense in the framing that we're given because again, the Bene Gesserit are after power and influence. So, of course, and they apparently have it because they can ask you to do anything, put your own life at risk, and you do it. You don't complain, you comply, which is why what Jessica did was so bad, right? Why she gets the smack. So, yeah, I don't know. I think thematically it works. I think it is a little weird. There, these are those little details where you start to, and maybe it's just being a fan of the original, version of any story when you're looking at an adaptation. Because I know we did this with Game of Thrones, right? Just pick it apart. Like, why would they say that? That character would never do that. Why would they leave out that one key notebook that's really important later on, right? So, yeah, I like that that so many people are paying so much attention though, because my fear was that people weren't paying attention and were coming through and just kind of being like, it was cool, worms, stuff blew up. Yeah, great movie.
One of the most controversial, I guess you could say, characters in the movie is Chani, and I think we've had a couple of episodes now already talking about her character, and even last year we discussed about how is she a different person in the book versus movie, and the conclusion is yes, this is a completely different person. You can't reconcile the two characters. But yeah, there's been a lot of interesting reactions in the community on both views. You know, obviously a lot of the people who liked the movie did like Chani, but I've also seen a huge amount of comments about people who otherwise liked the movie, but Chani was one of the elements that they didn't like. So let me read out a couple more comments examples. So from Toe786, thank you for the analysis. I just came back from theaters and I pretty much enjoyed the entire film. The only thing I didn't like was Chani's character and the Northern Sovereign divide that they portrayed with the Fremen. Aside from that, it was a cinematic masterpiece. Then we have Die3486. Chani's character arc was such a fail. She had no chemistry with Paul. That relationship is so crucial for Paul's journey. It is my only major letdown. I have other criticism with the film, but they're minor compared to Chani's portrayal. And then we had Time Diver X. I understand the reasoning behind most of the changes, and I even liked a few of them. I liked how we basically got a lot of Alia acting through Jessica in part 2. That was an interesting spin that I enjoyed. Still not a fan of movie Chani, but I understand what they were going for, making her an audience point of view character. Didn't hate her, just clashed too much with the Chani in my head. Those were some of the reactions. And Johnny, I know that you had picked out one longer reaction as well. That kicks off this part of the discussion.
Yeah, it was a comment on our most recent video from Samuel Proudlove 3774, and it was actually interesting because he called back to one of those earlier videos that we had last year, saying, "Don't know if you remember, but you spent a podcast discussing a comment I left a few months back where he voiced concerns about Chani's character changes." Basically went on to say a lot of similar things to what you just elaborated on, Marcus. But to kind of sum it up, liked Zendaya's performance, thought she was great in the movie, but I ultimately felt like the character, pretty much that the fears that they had previously came to fruition in terms of how the character was actually depicted. Saying that, in my opinion, there needed to be a point in the film, perhaps before the final battle, where Chani needs to support Paul. She doesn't support Paul and philosophically disagrees with the Fremen who are going to fight, yet fights alongside them for the battle. And then upon Paul's victory, decides to storm out of the room and go ride a sandworm by herself because Paul takes Irulan as his wife. For me, I can forgive the omissions, such as, toddler Alia, the guild, etc. However, I cannot forgive as a Dune fan the departure from the spirit of the novel. For me, to end the film with Chani riding a sandworm because she's upset was my least favorite part. The Holy War is about to begin. I think the film is grappling with bigger issues here, I guess. But I enjoyed Chani's character for about half the film up until after Paul kind of takes the water of life and they split up a little bit and the perspective is kind of shifted. So, I think to close it out, they said, in my opinion, this still is evident of the theme of the film and audiences would find it troubling. And someone who originally did not support Paul has done a complete 180. So it sounds like they understand that. And of course, they said, love the pod. So appreciate that comment. And from Samuel Proudlove, I think, and so what I was saying earlier, I think this is a larger, sentiment. Marcus had some comments there that certainly shared that. I think, and we had an article recently, I think that went up. I'm not sure if it was last week or the week before, but and there was a lot of discussion about that I saw on Twitter and whatnot. So I think it's definitely an interesting point of contention. I mean, I will say, so for one thing, this change to the character didn't bother me personally. I don't know what it is, but as much as I like Paul and Chani, I didn't really come around on their relationship as like something that was affecting or like something I could really relate to until Messiah.
I was just going to say, this is one aspect that I think I mentioned in our first review after seeing the film for the first time that I really was kind of thrown by such an emphasis on their relationship and then Chani's pretty drastic change overall. I will say though, in my third viewing last night, it really it creates for a really engaging storyline to kind of counterbalance and provide sort of a more broad, rich experience with all of this political intrigue and war dynamics going on in the story. And then to have these moments that I think Hans Zimmer, just with his love theme, which comes a few times in the film, is just so hauntingly beautiful, like I've mentioned in the past. But for me, it ended up being a much more rich, balanced, theatrical plot experience to have this relationship develop. I had to kind of suspend disbelief, as it were, in my second viewing to just say, yes, I know how the story is in the book. I just let it go. And so in this third viewing, it was really a rewarding experience. Even though I think Samuel makes a really good point of, yeah, but would she really be, driving off to cool off in her car on the worm, just to let it all go and take a breather? Yeah, that's a good point. She might not be. However, I think that is a natural response, especially the way the film ends. And so I did feel like the way they wrote her character's reaction to that moment where Paul basically says, you know, Chani, you're my person, but I'm going to do this for a bigger reason. And of course, she's going to be devastated, and she was shocked. And so it worked for me. And I guess I'm saying it's continuing to work for me, despite the departure from the book.
People do get bothered that she leaves at the end. And we already talked about this before. And I think we were talking about kind of in a more modern context, how that operates. But I think people should note that, it's all about like, oh, well, she is mad at Paul because of, the marriage situation. Yeah, that is part of it. She's also mad about, her people being hijacked to some degree by this, voice from the outer world. I mean, if she was just mad about the marriage thing and didn't care about Paul and was just leaving to like not be with him anymore, she would have done that when he said, oh, I'm going to marry like Eurolon. Like she could have just left right then if that was the only, if she didn't care about Paul to the extent that I think some people are suggesting, like she's some jilted lover. I've seen people mentioning that. She stays there to see Paul, if he's going to survive this duel with Feyd, for example.
But you're right. She's literally physically being drawn away from him. No, what I was going to say was that they've made a lot of choices where the domino effect has to be that Chani is disconnected from all of those things that we know about her in the book. They decided to make her a relatable character for the audience. And in doing so, they separated her from any kind of conversation that she would have about her duties, in support of either her religious duties or her support of Paul. Like she has many conversations with Jessica where Jessica explains. It's sort of touched on in the film, but not really. And you're right. Like she's more concerned about the fact that all those Fremen are shipping off on those ships, right? She's looking at those ships taking off. So yeah, I think it's really just the fact that it wouldn't make any narrative sense in this version for her to have those types of emotional reactions to other things because they've already separated her from her connection to those pieces. Yeah, you're right. I don't think it's necessarily as much as like I'm mad that Paul's marrying Ireland. Like she knows how stuff works. But she has said many times, you better not change. You better not do what you say, that you see her.
Yeah, I think it's one of those things where you know what happens in Dune Messiah, so you know the strength of their love. And the end just seems to diverge from that. So, Paul takes the water of life, Chani slaps him and storms out. Then there's, she talks to Stilgar saying, you can stop this. He ignores her, so she storms out. And then at the end, Paul marries Irulan and she storms out. And at each point, Paul and Chani just seem to be getting further away. And I'd have liked, as a fan of the book, I'm not sort of criticizing the movie, but as a fan of the book, I'd have liked to have seen that arc to sort of come back towards Paul a little bit. And we just don't get that. And that's the book fan of me going, this isn't the Chani that we know and love. What's going to happen in Messiah? Now, it could well be that when, a couple of years down the line, when we're talking about Dune Part 3, that we're saying, oh, this is the perfect setup, Messiah. Or maybe not. Who knows? I think that's the conflict with inside me is, book Chani and film Chani are very different, and the ending, particularly not just the journey, but the destination for the character is also very, very different.
She's so isolated. I mean, Paul says she'll come to understand. And it's so callous of him to just say that. He doesn't even say it to her. He doesn't go to comfort her. He doesn't say anything to her. He just goes off and starts, moving pieces on the board. She's very isolated. And she's going to continue to be, right? Like people are not going to be great. So
this part of the movie, like the last 15, 20 minutes with everything that happens, with Chani and Paul and whatnot. Like that to me was like the most like affecting part of the movie, I think. And I think a lot of it comes down to Zendaya's performance, which I think is really great. But especially in terms of performance, like the moment when they look at each other after Paul gets stabbed, like she's worried that the person she loves is about to die. Like you absolutely feel that and make that connection. And Paul, similarly with his reaction and look at Chani, I think for that little moment, it's very brief and it's not, really substantial, but on some level, like works in the back of my head. I'm just like, damn, like I even in watching the movie, I'm like, I really hope Paul doesn't die. Like, I really hope that him and Chani can like reconcile this or work out. So, yeah, it's super. I mean, it's a very interesting, obviously, change in interpretation. I understand why people are bothered by it because it's just so different. But
And I do want to elaborate a bit more on like why some people are maybe bothered by the changes. So as Johnny mentioned, we did have an article on DUNETalk.com written by Dr. Kara Kennedy. So she wrote about Chani and empowered women stereotype in Dune Part 2. And so for context, so she's someone who's studied the women of Dune academically for many years, and she's read all the books. She's written a book about the Bene Gesserit herself, and like her third book, we talked with her a couple of episodes back. But basically, I've seen a couple of quotes on X Twitter from people who are saying like, "Oh, I didn't read the book, but I heard that in the book Chani is nothing. So in the film, she's great." That's the thing, If you haven't read the book, there are a lot of things that you're not going to be aware of, obviously. But also for people who have read the book, because Dune is a book that has so much subtext from Frank Herbert. Like the whole battle happens off screen. Like the death of Leto II happens off screen, but as a reader, you're picking up on those subtexts, and the more you read the book, the more you're getting deeper into these characters. Even though, yes, Chani doesn't have very much screen time in the book, right? She has much more screen time in the movie. So from that perspective, it makes sense that you're thinking, okay, she has more depth on screen. You see her as a Fedaykin, and she's a badass warrior, but she was also a badass warrior in the book. So there were people who were coming to Paul and coming to challenge, and Chani was basically dispatching them before they would reach Paul. Paul was even angry with her about it. They came to challenge me, and then you killed them, right? And it clearly showed that Chani was not just someone who was saying, yes, master, right? As I've heard, like she had her own mind, she had her own way of doing things. She was a Fremen, clearly. So she was a badass warrior there in the book as well. But she had also a lot of those other roles in the book. So as mentioned a touch earlier, she was a religious leader. She had the loving relationship with Paul. Like right now in the movie, it's basically they've been together for several months, but we don't have that whole development of the relationship being together for years. Then of course there was a connection with her family, with Leah Kynes, and her being the daughter of the person who was setting up the dream for Arrakis. So I think that's why we're getting this concern from some of the people who have known the character for a longer time in the books.
So what you're saying, Marcus, is we need a 20-hour miniseries.
Yeah, exactly, Mark.
Bringing it back to the start.
Yeah, the part that I felt that difference the most was probably in the Water of Life ritual with Paul, because she does just kind of come and then they back her into being part of a prophecy. That's just a book reader problem, right? Like the version of Chani in the film seems to be resonating really well with people who are just watching the movie because Zendaya and Timothy is in it, right? Like, so I think they made that sacrifice to make her more relatable.
And then I realized we haven't mentioned Alia at all in this episode. And I think Rachel, there was one comment that caught your attention as well on Alia.
Oh yes. Yes. It's actually going back to that same video that I pulled the other comment from. It's from Maria Williams 4180. It says, I didn't mind Alia the talking fetus at all. Her communication with Jessica was weird but fantastic. It was a brilliant way to convey an enlightened fetus. It didn't diminish the film experience for me. I enjoyed seeing the Bene Gesserit machinations and their true roles in this universe. I feel Paul killing the Baron was earned, and if you will, and more satisfying, as was Gurney Halleck taking down Raban. Changes, sure, but cohesive. And I just have a friendly disagreement with that because I actually was watching it the last time I saw it, the last bit where Paul goes and stabs the Baron and, and he says, die like an animal. I just thought, God, this would be so badass if this was a little girl doing this. Like, if this was just a little scary girl, because Alia for me represents so much of like the true horror of Dune, right? Like not only Jessica's choices, but the universe Paul is creating, the future that is coming for them, the reality of being, prescient and what the Kwisatz Haderach can do to people through time. Alia is sort of like a genesis point for that, like a little preview of bad consequences. And so just having this, like, it would just be so cool if this little girl just walked up those stairs, was like, hello, grandfather, and just stabbed him and like looked into the camera. I just felt like, and I know they cut her because they thought it was goofy, whatever. I don't think a badass toddler is goofy, but that's just me. I wish that she was there. And watching Jessica talk to her stomach does make me feel like I'm watching a woman go insane from like just being pregnant. I know that they did a lot of stuff to like make us know that Alia has like an awareness, but did they really do enough to tell us what it means that she's an abomination? Like what her abilities are? I don't know. I've seen it 3 times. I don't know. So I kind of just wanted to disagree with that because, gosh, I just had a clear vision in my head of what it would look like if she had just been, you know, this little precocious kid on set, just looking at the camera with a knife. That would have been so cool. But gosh, that would have been so good.
Johnny, I think since last time we spoke, you finally watched Lynch's Dune. So
Oh,
I'm just wondering
yeah.
what your impression of Alicia of St. Alia of the Knife in Lynch's Dune is. Do you understand why we all so desperately want Alia in
No, I don't.
part 2?
Oh boy, I'm nervous about what I'm going to say here. Well, let me put it this way. I guess in terms of, I'm going to stick to just this character. Okay. I didn't get what all the fuss is about, I guess. Like, I'm like, okay, like, cool. Like, I dig it. I think it's a fun little like performance, and like the way she's depicted, I thought was cool. I guess I was expecting more, maybe just based on like how many times I've seen fans of the movie or like of that character, like just talk about it and like use different images or quotes and things like that. But when it was over, like it ended and I was like, wait, like that was it. Like I mean, it's true to the book, I guess, in terms of like how involved she is, which, cause she's not like, she doesn't show up that much. Like she's there for what she does basically. Especially at the end with the Emperor and the Baron. But yeah, I don't know. I guess like I had a certain expectation maybe, and it just wasn't like, it was not met necessarily. So that was a little bit of a bummer. I guess I'm just like mystified I wasn't there when the movie came out and then now I'm seeing it like decades later and even after like a whole nother adaptation has come out. So, yeah, I don't know. I guess I don't know. That character just eludes me in terms of this. There's a certain thing like it's not getting me. I love the character in Messiah. I think that she's one of the standout parts of that book, and I'm hopeful that she will be in the movie. But yeah, just didn't. I was like, cool, but
yeah, that's an interesting reaction, and I actually relate to that, Johnny. I really love Alia in the book. I just thought that was a really fascinating thing to do in the storyline, but she does have an underwhelming type of sort of role to play, at least in my opinion, in Lynch's Dune. But there's something that I'm just so attached to her about, and I don't know what that is. I don't know.
well, she's a cute little girl, so like I understand that part. And I like when she came on, I was like, oh, like this is like I just imagine David Lynch like directing her, and he's so interesting. I really love him as a filmmaker, so I think that part of it I definitely appreciate it. But as like I think she has like the last line in the movie, right? And like when the movie ended, I was just like, wow, like that was so like, I don't know, because it's a very different ending from the book, obviously. And I knew that going into it, but yeah, overall, I don't think I'll be revisiting that movie anytime soon.
Really, I felt like the new version really made me appreciate Lynch's version more, just because they're so different. It's like the embrace of the weird.
Yeah. I think that's part of why I wanted to wait for both of these movies to come out, so I could watch Lynch and like have the full novel, like in each respect. And so I think, and of course, I just finished rereading the novel as well for like the 3rd time. So, I was definitely fresh and like thinking of like direct comparisons, but honestly, there was so many differences and changes and like things that were not like the book that I guess now I understand how some book fans felt watching the film version because
Yeah.
there's things in the Lynch version. I'm just like, I was getting like kind of mad. I was like, that's not how that should be. Like, that should be like this. So, hey, there's a twist to every, turn of the Dune, story on screen, I guess.
Yeah. But I'm also very attached to Alia as a character. I think like the rage of being born under a very specific expectation of being almost punished for existing, I think is a surprising take from a writer like Frank Herbert that I've always appreciated.
Mhm.
So, yeah.
Hey, cool. So I think that was some really interesting topics to pick up on. And yeah, as mentioned, we really love all the comments and the questions that we've gotten. Really some great insights. So definitely keep them coming. Like we really appreciate all of you as community. Yeah, so expect more to come in the weeks ahead. We're going to deep dive on some topics. We may do some more episodes diving into specific questions. So definitely a lot to look forward to. So for now, yeah, let's go ahead and sign off.
Hi, everybody. I was Rachel. You can find me on Instagram at Darth_Rachel. And I also host the Robin Hobb book-based podcast called Buckkeep Radio. And if you really liked Game of Thrones, you can find me on some of those old podcasts, Fire and Lunch.
Mark from Junior Info here. Great to be back with the gang yet again. Thanks to the community for all the questions, fueling our Dune therapy sessions once again. Keep them coming.
Yeah, great discussion. I really appreciate everyone's comments, fueling this and hearing all the different perspectives. Great to see everyone on the show again. So thank you for tuning in. Johnny Sobchak. You can find me on social media at Johnny Sobchak.
Garin, thanks for joining. You can find me at Dune Companion on X and Twitter. Really appreciate the comments and the engagement from all of you out there. It really makes it fun to talk to the team about how you feel about the adaptation. And so appreciate your involvement.
Yeah, this is Marcus Gabriel. You can find me writing at DuneNewsNet.com and on X Twitter at MarcusIsWriting. Yeah, and as mentioned, we want this to be a community where everybody can voice their perspectives. I think it's a great thing that we are hearing so many different things about the movie, and we're definitely going to be exploring and talking about this film for years to come. So look forward to more movie stuff and interviews and some other cool stuff coming up on next Dune Talk. Until then, take care.
We hope you've enjoyed Dune Talk. Remember to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you know when the next episode drops. Stay tuned to DuneNewsNet.com and add us to your social feeds. Be the first to hear breaking news and reviews.